Let's talk about the new Necrons rules then, with a focus on the awesome power of the Starshatter arsenal. Is it really looking quite as overpowered as the internet seems to think it is? Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Grotmas detachments once more. And in this one it's the turn of the Necrons, with a fairly monstrously powerful damage dealing formation that can apply to much of the codex. We saw some teasers and leaks of this one the other day, but now we have everything confirmed and revealed in full. The Starshatter arsenal is indeed the Necron detachment for Grotmas, where you get a new detachment for each faction in the game. They're all fully playable in core match play rules for competitive play and everything. I've seen a bunch of comments asking as to when they come out on the 40k app. That'll be in January. This one's the 6th detachment that Games Workshop have reached so far. So far we've had Death Guard, Dark Angels, Tyranids, Thousand Sons and Admech. And it looks like tomorrow could be a particularly interesting one, not just getting a detachment, but a full index reveal for the Death Watch, where it sounds like the aim of that will be to return them as a faction that can key off core codex Space Marines. Today though, it's the turn of the Necrons. They've been doing fairly well in Pariah Nexus so far, with win rates of around about 51%. Certainly not overly strong, though one of the most competitively played factions, and have a fair few good ways to make them work. The majority of lists tends to use Hypercrypt still, with its teleporting shenanigans and close deep strike for easy scoring, though it seems that both Awakened Dynasty and since the keyword update Obeisance Phalanx has had a good bit of success as well. And Necrons in general do seem to have been maybe a little bit overrepresented on the top tables of tournaments, winning a bunch of big events, though not quite at the same rate as some of the top armies in the game at that respect, with things like Guard and Genestealer cults. As mentioned, the Starshatter arsenal was the detachment that leaked early. Its name was revealed earlier in a PDF, then it got its rules widely circulated a day early after a mistimed upload on YouTube. And the theme of the detachment is a Necron vehicle and mounted one, generally focusing on big firepower, and overlords cracking out all sorts of scary death machines to utterly destroy the enemy and wipe them from the tomb world, no doubt. The rules are generally quite focused on non-titanic vehicles and mounted units, so basically everything that hovers around and deals death pretty much. There's still really quite a lot of stuff that's very applicable to all the other things in Codex Necrons. A lot of the stratagems can be used on whatever. There's a really powerful reroll enhancement, and the core rule works fine for them. It does seem like it's going to be a very general purpose Necron detachment, and you don't just have to spam vehicles. Now we do have the rules confirmed. It really does seem like this could be the single most powerful Grotmas detachment so far. I would have said that that was the Admech the day before. Most of the others sort of feel like they're sort of niche builds that you could build around, but didn't really look objectively stronger than the main detachments that they had for their codexes. If first impression turned out to be accurate though, this one easily could be perhaps the single strongest Necron detachment out there, and could be a big source of strength to make the faction stronger than it is. Maybe not the best thing in the world, given that they're doing at least fairly well already. The core rule seems to be exactly as leaked, +1 to hit against enemy units on objectives, so really quite a big helpful general purpose damage buff to the Necrons, and this one isn't locked to anything, so it should help a whole bunch of Necrons out there. It's not really going to be something that the opponent's going to be able to avoid all that much, as you do need to stand on objectives to score points in Warhammer. If you don't, you're probably going to lose on primary. I feel like between this and the +1 to wound stratagem, you might genuinely have the strategy of try and keep some of your biggest, scariest stuff not on objectives so it doesn't get killed too easily. In theory, a +1 to hit usually equates to a +25% damage boost, though in reality it might be a little bit less than that for Necrons. Most of their units often tend to have lethal hits or sustained hits on their attacks in different ways, and they don't get boosted, so the damage increase will just be a little bit less than otherwise. It's still a really good core detachment rule though. Otherwise, the second part of it is for non-titanic vehicles and mounted units gaining the assault keyword, so basically very fast moving gun platforms. Doomsday Arcs can gain a big burst of speed, and they're already really quite strong. The Silent King and Annihilation barges and plenty of other things would enjoy it, as would Locust Destroyers and Heavy Destroyers, all being able to get lines of sight more easily, or potentially get range on their targets if they needed it. I'd say probably the +1 to hit on objectives is the more impactful bit of it, though this will definitely help. Extra speed can be really helpful for vehicle heavy lists to make sure that you can actually get the important lines of sight to take out the units that you most need to. I guess this will be competing with the core rule for Hypercrypt, allowing you to take things on and off the board, which might also be very good for getting things like Doomsday Arcs and big firepower lines of sight, or the Awakened Dynasty's leader bonuses, where you get the +1 to hit, but it's just, as always, for the squads that have leaders in, but the other squads won't get it. Before jumping into stratagems, it might be worth just reminding about a couple of datasheets that seem to be extra good in this, and one of the biggest seems to be the Silent King. For a vehicle that does non-titanic vehicles, he's the biggest, scariest non-titanic vehicle that you can get. 26 wounds in total, with those Triarchal Menhirs absorbing some overkill as well. 2 massive great big damage 6 attacks with those Annihilation beams. More shooting from the Scepter and the Staff of Stars, and then some very nice general purpose melee with the Scythe of Dust. He's made his way into a fair few competitive lists, particularly ones for Hypercrypts and certainly Obeisance Phalanx, and he's really quite efficient. And he's got buffing abilities with reroll ones to hit and wound in a big aura, applying at range and melee, and the option to ignore modifiers if necessary too. Otherwise for detachment units, also worth mentioning the Doomsday Arc, 190 points as pretty much the single best firepower unit the Necrons have right now. They were kind of well balanced with Locust heavy destroyers before I thought, and then they got a points decrease and they went up. At least fairly hard to kill with 14 wounds at toughness 9 with a 4+ invulnerable save. That'll weather things like las cannons quite well. And then for weapons it gets d6+1, strength 18, AP 4 and damage 4 attacks with a Doomsday Cannon and a bunch of Gauss flares to back it up and slay infantry up close. In general it's just a fairly easy include in just about any Necron list at the moment. Bearing in mind those profiles for the scary vehicle targets, let's get into the stratagems. Merciless Reclamation is the +1 to wound one. You get +1 to wound against things on objectives. This one's locked to non-titanic things, but it can be used on anything, whether a vehicle, monster or anything else. You could use it on units like Catan if you wanted to, or maybe a whole bunch of Immortals, re-rolling wound rolls on Teslas, and basically just doubles down on the detachment rule with a really easy +1 to hit and wound against anything that you wanted it for. This one does have the downside in that it won't work if the opponent hasn't put their big scary stuff on an objective, and really does feel like that could be one of the best ways to counter this. Unyielding Form is 1 command point for a -1 to wound for a mounted or vehicle unit, only applying if the attacking strength is greater than the toughness of the model. This one does seem absolutely great on the Silent King and the Doomsday Arc. Both of them are genuinely quite hard to take out with their big wound counts and good invulnerable saves, so getting a -1 to wound on that is rather great, and they will often be triggering the strength greater than toughness thing, as they're between toughnesses 9 and 10. Next up is Chrono Shift, which is an auto advance 6 inches for a non-titanic vehicle or mounted unit, so basically a flat 16-inch movement for a Doomsday Arc that wants to get an angle on an enemy unit. It could be really nice for Locust destroyers as well to gain speed and get in range with their 24-inch range guns, or perhaps guaranteeing that you needed to get to a mid-board objective and still being able to shoot. No need to even roll the advance, you can guarantee that your unit can get there. Definitely a useful support one that'll come up quite a lot. For 1 command point, there's Dimensional Tunnel. This allows your non-titanic vehicle or mounted units to ghost through terrain. It is just in the movement phase, so this doesn't work on charges. This one could be used on a bunch of things, such as Locust destroyers remaining safe and then stepping up to shoot things hard, though it seems easily the most powerful on the Silent King. You could have him safe hold up in a big ruin, then move forward, potentially advancing as he does so, to be able to put a massive great big threat right down on a mid-board objective and get the jump on enemy units. It definitely helps with perhaps his biggest weakness of having to go around terrain and not really having all that much speed. There's Endless Servitude for 1 command point, where you get to activate reanimation protocols for non-titanic units on an objective that you control. The leaks weren't really very clear as to when this happens, but it seems that it's at the end of your fight phase, so a little bit restrictive than it might have been. There's still the option to throw some extra wounds back on a unit's rarely a bad idea, particularly when you could have a Canoptek Reanimator doubling down on this, and you could trade 1 command point for 2d3 wounds restored. This seems again great on the Silent King. If you had a Canoptek Reanimator, then between this and regular reanimation, you could be healing 8 wounds per turn, though perhaps equally or more problematically, you could also use it on Catan as well. And even d3 extra wounds restored on a Catan has an enormous amount of value, given just how hard those wounds are to chip off. Finally, for 1 command point, there's Reactive Repositioning. This one's a really nasty redeploy one. A unit gets shot, and then after it's taken any damage, you get to move d6 inches if it's a non-vehicle or mounted one, 6 inches if it is. That seems like a really nice alternative to the -1 to wound one. You can use the -1 to wound one if it makes more sense, but otherwise if you think that unit's going to get focused, you might be able to move 6 inches and just either get away from an oncoming close combat or hide behind terrain. That really seems very disruptive if your opponent's trying to clear some Doomsday Arcs out. Then we've got some enhancements, and first up there's Dread Majesty for 30 points. This one seems initially like one of the single strongest enhancements on the game, though given the context of the Necron units maybe it isn't quite as good as it might be in certain other armies. It is still ridiculously powerful either way though, of course. You give this to an Overlord or Catacomb Command Barge, and you give an aura of reroll ones to hit and reroll ones to wound within 6 inches to anything that isn't a Titanic unit, and again it's not locked to vehicles and mounters. It also is confirmed that it works both at range and in melee, so it is just basically a staggeringly great force multiplier. For all the units that affect, whether it's range or melee, it'll usually be a 36% damage boost, unless you had something like inbuilt reroll wounds or similar. Doomsday Arcs particularly like the rerolls, as they do with the Silent King ones, and you could use it on Catan as well, which again is rather scary. Though perhaps the only slight bit of anti-synergy that this one has is that Sarek already gets that if desired. If you are running the Silent King in the detachment, you'll already have a copy of this rule. so it might make it just a little bit more take or leave, given that you also need one of the relevant units to hand it out to. If not using the Silent King for the detachment, it seems absolutely auto-include to make sure you fit it in somewhere. And even with him, I feel like you could justify it. He could use the Ignores modifier as part of his buff, and you could use this or another one, or just have two sources of that incredibly powerful reroll, so most of your army will be covered by it. Otherwise, there's miniaturized Nebula Scope for Ignores cover for the model unit, could be nice for a Locust Lord on Locust Destroyers, or a unit that's buffing some Immortals perhaps, maybe not quite as crazy, but certainly simple, cheapish and effective. There's Demanding Leader for 10 points, which this one does look a little bit weaker than the leak suggested. It's only limited to picking one non-Titanic vehicle or mounted units to be able to fall back and shoot, though you do declare it in the movement phase, which means that you could move into position and then trigger it on the unit that you most need to. It is good support. You could maybe have something like a Hexmark Destroyer bear it if you wanted it, so it wouldn't get shot down. The enhancement itself is good. I feel like you just need a free character that didn't have an enhancement to hold it and not want one of the others. Otherwise though, and the other very scary one is the Chrono Impotence field. This one's 25 points, and one non-Titanic vehicle or mounted unit within 6 inches gets -1 damage, chosen in the command phase. Again, as with a few things, this one probably looks best on the Silent King. -1 damage on that immense profile, particularly when you could get -1 to wounds, and stratagems to help as reanimation as well, all looks rather nasty. It feels like the vast majority of factions in the game are going to struggle to bring him down, unless they're able to hit him with something with just ridiculously ludicrous damage. Even if not him though, seems like it could be worth putting on the most exposed vehicle each turn. You would just need to think about the command phase setup, so the one that you wanted would be available next turn. Again, feels like one that could be good for being put on a Hexmark Destroyer if you want a small unit to keep them safe. Overall, the detachment does feel like it's got a fairly massive amount of options. As mentioned, I feel like Doomsday Arcs and the Silent King might be the most obvious ones, but given all the other stuff like the powerful reroll enhancement and the detachment rule for +1 to hit and wound for objectives, there's a huge amount of other things that could benefit. Here's just one quick draft idea for an army list: the Silent King leading 3 Doomsday Arcs to give them his rerolls, and likely playing aggressively up the board to be able to get lines of sight when they need to. The Hexmark there to give the Silent King -1 damage, potentially have him going bursting through a wall to get him up the field and into the opponent's face so they have to deal with him, and then strongly consider the -1 to wound stratagem if he starts getting focused. The Doomsday Arc should be able to put out a scary amount of firepower, and potentially could use that reactive move stratagem to try and hide one behind a wall. Again, if it does look like they might be in some sort of serious danger. To support them, there's both a Canoptech Reanimator and a Canoptech Spider, boosted reanimation, and then a 6+ Feel No Pain for the core vehicles, perhaps doubling down a bit, but I feel like given that there's only 4 models that are some of the main shooting threats, doing everything to keep them alive seems sensible. Another great big shooting unit and a Locust Lord with Ignores cover and 6 Locust Destroyers. They'd be hitting on 2s, re-rolling 1s with auto wounds on 5s, or with Ignores cover, so should have a good chance of clearing out most stuff, and again can use all the good stratagems. I went with Imitek the Stormlord leading a block of 10 Lich Guard with swords and shields. They can be a durable presence on one mid-board objective, and Imitek can keep the command points flowing for all those good stratagems. They certainly enjoy the +1 to hit and wound options on mid-board objectives too. And then a few slightly random scoring units, a set of Death Marks to Deep Strike, a single Locust Destroyer to be a placeholder, 5 Flayed ones to screen the midboard, and 3 Scarabs to be some annoying nuisance screening chaff. Hopefully they could keep some of the secondaries flowing and being annoying things to deal with on the midboard. I'd say that low objective control is probably one of the biggest weaknesses of this one. Maybe it's going a little bit too far into just the big embrace of the damage dealing, but certainly feels like it could be a pretty intimidating list, using the Silent King to be near unkillable and soak up loads of damage, and the Doomsday Arcs to stay safe with the detachment rules and reactive moves and things. Overall, it just looks very strong for a vast array of Necron units, not literally everything, but a lot of stuff seems to have excessive value here. A lot of people's first reactions to the rules have been that there's a good chance that it's pretty overpowered and might cause issues for Necron balance, and maybe balance in Warhammer 40k in general. I think at first impressions, I've rated it as probably the single strongest Necron attachment right now, but not quite broken to the point where it's just not worth playing against, not like Start of Edition Eldari or that kind of nonsense. I tentatively say that this is probably one that it might be important to take in the context of the upcoming balance data slate. Some units might get adjustments, and in particular I really wouldn't be too surprised if Doomsday Arcs wind up going up a little bit, which could take the shine off the detachment a little bit if they're not quite so standout efficient. If left how it is though, it does feel like this would be one of the stronger army lists out there in the game. There's so many options, I'm not sure exactly what form of it would be the one that winds up getting played all that much. It perhaps might not be the best thing for internal Necron Codex balance as well. I wouldn't be surprised that with the dawn of this, a lot fewer people would choose to play things like Awakened Dynasty, which while also having some pretty good stuff, just doesn't really feel like it's got quite as much in terms of just sheer power, at least not with the units costed the way they are at the moment. In any case though, certainly looks really quite scary. I would still say that Hypercrypt does have some big advantages though, and I don't think that that will completely go away. Repeated redeploys and access to 3-inch deep strikes are rather great, and it means that that one should be outscoring this sort of list on secondary objectives and things, even if they don't have the big crazy damage, and getting that sort of redeployment on things like Doomsday Arcs and the Silent King is also good there too. Again, that one had some rumours that there might be changes to 3-inch deep strike though, and maybe making rules like that go to 6-inch as a thing. I guess we'll see in the balanced data slate once more though. Look forward to hearing your thoughts on the detachment though, now we've had rules confirmed. Let me know your impressions, does it live up to the hype? Will Necrons actually look this good after a balanced data slate? Look forward to all your thoughts as always. Feel free to check out my reviews of the other Grotmas detachments, which I'll link in the playlist down in the video description, but otherwise looks like I'll be back tomorrow to talk Deathwatch. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics or check back tomorrow for that. Finally, if you've been enjoying all the videos on the channel and you'd like to help keep them coming, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.